Welcome to the Funds Ireland MiniCon podcast. Mini conferences, mini conversations with and for the funds industry. We're looking at ways to transform challenge into best practice, and we're doing that in the areas of people and culture, technology, and innovation.
Hello, podcast listeners, and welcome to this episode of the FIMC podcast with me, Danny Lawler, MD of Quest. For this episode, I'm delighted to be joined again by Tzialli of Philip Lee, and the topic of conversation is MiCA or Meeka. Is it tomato or tomato? I call it MiCA for what it's worth. It's the Markets and Crypto Assets Regulation. So myself and Andrew are going to chat through what the MiCA is about, who's caught by it, why it was introduced or is planning to be introduced, and the kinds of requirements that it's going to place on firms, whether they are issuing crypto assets or acting as service providers in the crypto assets area. It's pretty onerous, a lot of obligations involved. It's going to be quite costly to comply with, but there are some upsides to it in terms of European passports and what have you. So we chat through those as well. Great as always to have Andrew on the podcast. So sit back, enjoy. If you're in any way interested in MiCA, or crypto assets in the European Union, enjoy this podcast. If you do, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your usual podcast provider. And now on with the podcast. Hi, Andrew. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Danny. Always good to be here.
Well, let's start with the most pressing issue. I say MiCA. Are you a MiCA?
I'm a Meeka. I'm a Meeka guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there an industry standard?
Not yet.
Not yet.
So.
Okay.
Not yet.
Well, I'm settling on MiCA, and
okay. We'll agree to disagree.
Yeah, fair enough. How are you keeping? You well?
Very good. Yeah. Living the dream in lockdown 3. Yeah.
Oh Lord. Well, I'm feeling quite old. Our eldest just turned 12 at the weekend. And
wow.
One of her birthday presents she wanted was a dial phone, a spin dial telephone.
Amazing.
If anything was to make you feel old.
Yeah.
She actually have a landline, although we didn't have a phone plugged into it, but I never disconnecting. So we did have that.
God, that is old school.
Questions.
Yeah.
She was dialing quite a long number and made a mistake with the second last digit. And she said, she had to cancel that number. How do I do that?
God, that is a blast from the past. I haven't had to think about those for a good while.
Yeah, so you just gotta hang up and start again. Oh.
Yeah, blimey.
And then she's holding the receiver and said, "I'm waiting for Nana to ring." And I said, "Oh, no, you can't hold the receiver."
God, yeah, that does make me feel old as well, I must say.
Yeah, and then she picked it up and obviously had the kind of the tone there that said it was ready to ring. She said, "Oh, it's ringing. It's ringing." I was going, "No,
that's not it either."
Yeah, and eventually she got the hang of it and she said, "Right, I have it now. So how do I take a call in my bedroom?" I said, "Oh,
no, none of those things.
None of the above."
Yeah, none of the above.
If you wanted something to make you feel old,
there you go.
There you go. But I guess if you want something to make you feel young and at the cutting edge, MiCA is it.
Yes. The latest in the weird and wonderful world of blockchain and crypto.
Well, let's tackle it then. So, MiCA, the Markets and Crypto Assets, which is a draft regulation issued as a proposal for legislation by the Commission back in September time. And the idea being it's part of their digital assets initiative in the EU. The idea being to bring into the regulatory sphere basically anything to do with crypto or digital assets or advising or servicing digital assets. What's your take on the background to MiCA?
Yeah, so look, I mean, you know yourself, Danny, from the discussions we've had over the last couple of years when businesses approach us, digital assets, crypto funds, crypto advisory, we're often in between minds as to, okay, so where does this fall? Is this a European e-money regs point? Is this a MiFID point? Is it a combination of them? And I think MiCA or MiCA tries to address that, and I think it has to be done. EU-wide standardization is certainly important, because as well as obviously the likes of MiFID, Markets in Financial Instruments Directive, being vast, and there's a lot in crypto that you can shoehorn into that. What we don't have is a detailed and tailored regulatory, which is Europe-wide. Now, the likes of Malta have done their own thing to an extent, and Cyprus are doing something as well, and I think Estonia as well. But the standardization is currently absent, and on an EU-wide level, I think we definitely need something, and we're hoping MiCA is the answer.
Yeah, I think it certainly was ripe for that draft regulation. If you think about the fundamental principles of the union, being one of them free movement of capital, because crypto in a lot of areas was neither one thing nor another, it kind of was a bit of everything and a bit of this and that, there was no single regime that it was clear that you could point to and say, yes, this is what regulation you fall under. And so you either ended up with it being possibly caught by something that was there but designed for financial instruments or whatever, or more likely that there was nothing there. So some jurisdictions, the ones you mentioned there, and others have done their own thing, and then others, like in Ireland, we don't have anything specifically for crypto. So with a big patchwork of approaches, and not very conducive to a single market for capital or investor protection, or even levels of investor protection when you have different approaches across different member states. So I think it was right for the regulation.
Yeah, I think we needed it. And as the sector grows, and as more institutional money starts coming into it, it's going to hit a ceiling unless there is investor protection and transparency and clarity in terms of where we go as this grows. What regulation do I actually rely on when I'm trading crypto assets or holding crypto assets or advising on crypto assets? And I think the good thing with MiCA is it really, whilst parts of feel like MiFID in a way, it's not seeking to overlap on existing regulation at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the critical mass was there in digital assets to justify it. Because regulators and legislators are always on the lookout for what are the new developments at the edge, and they'll monitor loan origination and digital assets, and they will look to see, well, at what point is there enough interest or enough invested in this asset class or sector that we start to have to think about things like financial stability and consumer protection and types of people that could be harmed if things went wrong. And as you said, with the maturity of the sector and more institutional interest in it, it got to the point where I guess the legislators felt like they had to act. And so act they have, at least by publishing the proposal. Do you want to take us through a bit about who it applies to?
Yeah, sure. So I think the caveat, which of course lawyers love to give for anything they're ever saying, is it's still early days in the draft. But from what we have seen so far, it is quite broad, and it would capture, in terms of people that need to comply with it, platforms trading crypto assets or digital assets, offering exchange for crypto assets, for other crypto assets, people offering custody services, people being intermediaries for transfer of crypto assets, and probably the really broad one is advice on crypto assets, which probably covers a huge number of people. Now, of course, depending on which one of those you fall into, there will be a slightly different regulatory regime that applies to you. But the crux of it is, if you're doing any of those activities in the EU, or looking to within the next 6, 12, you need to be thinking about how this legislation or draft legislation could apply to you, because you're going to need to have your house in order.
Absolutely. I think it is, you're right, it is framed deliberately so broadly so that anybody who has a notion of issuing or servicing crypto assets is going to be caught by the regulation. I said, it's very MiFID-y feeling when you look at the different activities that it talks about being crypto services, service provider. So I said advice, if you are exchange, if you're custody of assets, all of that kind of thing. And then also for issuers, whether you're asset reference token issuer, a crypto asset issuer, or an electronic money token issuer, they're all covered by the regulation as well. So quite
it is, and to be honest with you, I think as it stands, it probably goes a little too far, because there's certain things, and this is with my geeky crypto hat on now. I mean, as I understand it from the legislation, it would even if say British Airways created a digital token on a blockchain for their loyalty program, that in part could be covered by this legislation or the draft legislation, which surely can't be the intention. You know, that the equivalent of that outside of crypto would never in a million years be captured by MiFID. So yeah, I think it's probably a little too broad, but I'm hoping those kind of those points will be ironed out as it progresses.
Yeah, and I guess that's what the consultation process is for, and the drafting process, to kind of weed out the unintended consequences, ideally before we get too far, rather than find out after the event that actually something odd is caught in there. Obligations that they're proposing to put on any of these firms that are in scope are fairly significant and substantial. And again, the kind of things we always see across financial services legislation. So obligations around minimum capital and that you have to hold for a rainy day should it be required. Obligations around governance and how you run the business, conflicts of interest. Market abuse is also covered, how you might be otherwise engaged in it or how to prevent firms from getting engaged in it. And then talks about liability as well, so liability of custodians of reserve assets, if it's an asset reference token, or those who are custodying digital assets. And so you're liable if it gets lost as a result of a hack, which is, a very high consumer protection standard. I guess it makes sense, but you'd wonder then how firms protect themselves against that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a lot of the things you said there, in my mind, I was kind of ticking off, that sounds very MiFID-y. That's basically MiFID. That's basically MiFID. It's almost MiFID plus a bit more, isn't it? They also, I think they go back as well and say, if you're issuing crypto assets or digital assets, they use the term crypto assets throughout. If you're issuing any, then you have to have a prospectus referred to as a white paper, which is probably a nod. All the initial coin offerings that were happening en masse 2015, 2016, and 2017, they were referred to as having they would just have a white paper, which was the kind of crypto world's own version of a prospectus. But they've given a nod to that now. But this is much more substantive than the white papers people involved in initial coin offerings would have seen a couple of years ago. This is clarifying risks, verification of statements that are being made, nothing misleading, like you would see for an IPO almost. So the bar is set a lot higher there.
Yeah, and I can imagine the fun that the lawyers will have writing pages and pages of risk factors for your The other thing that's there, they talk about a summary, which in the funds world or in financial services generally we'd know as a key investor document or a key investor information document, and something similar in there as well in terms of the summary, and even down to the liability provisions around saying that the issuer isn't liable for the summary provided it's consistent with the white paper. So again, very much a nod to existing financial services legislation. to holding client assets and how you would segregate them out, and your responsibility for monitoring client assets and making sure they get where they're supposed to go.
Yeah, and I think as important as all of that is, and notwithstanding what I said about needing regulation, the challenge with these things is always, what impact does this then have on innovation? Which I think is, there's definitely a balance there, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I mean, the idea that legislation facilitates innovation, I think is, we did an article, I said it was an oxymoron, and I think it is a contradiction, because the legislation is there to put boundaries on what you can do, whereas innovation always tries to push and go beyond. And so it's a difficult one for the legislators and the regulators to get right, because they're trying to balance consumer protection and financial stability. So they have to put in rules that protect the people that are going to invest in these assets. But at the same time, you're going to, if you put the barriers so high that it's so expensive to get into this business, then immediately you're ruling out a big cohort of probably the most innovative types. So things that, developments that could have been made then don't come about because the barriers to entry were too high. So getting that balance right between having protection that works but isn't so onerous that you keep out the innovative is a tricky one to do. But that's what regulation is about: barriers to entry, effectively.
Yeah, and look, there'll be a lot in the crypto asset world that think this is a terrible thing. One of the things that has created so many evangelists in this sector is the ease to market thus far, but that was mainly because it went so much faster than the legislators and the legislation in terms of its growth and progress and now appeal to retail investors. But I think, there's definitely a balance. There'll be people that will say, now it's gone too far. I don't think there'll be many people that, when this comes into play, saying it still doesn't do enough, because I think it's going to be comprehensive. But I suspect from the kind of traditional crypto community that they'll be looking at this saying, well, Joe Bloggs can't do this anymore. It's now just going to be, it's just going to be the big hedge funds and the big banks and people with very, very deep pockets. But as the sector has grown the way it has, I think certainly just looking at the aggregate value of crypto tokens worldwide, it's just gone past $1.5 trillion. You can't have an industry that big without having comprehensive regulation and legislation around it, regardless of if it stifles innovation.
Any crumbs of comfort we can give to those providers who are kind of gnashing and wailing as a result of this big burden that's now going to be thrust upon them? I guess on my side, I'd say the thing to bear in mind is, you do get a passport as a result of the regulation. So if you are regulated in one jurisdiction, you have the right to carry out activities in other member states. And so it tackles that problem we discussed at the outset, Andrew, of rules applying in different jurisdictions. And it becomes very expensive and difficult to, if you have to analyze each member state to understand, well, what are the rules in Estonia versus Ireland versus France or Germany? You don't need to do that now. The rules will be the same. And then also, once you're authorized in Ireland, you want to run crypto assets in other jurisdictions, or you want to provide advice, then you'll be able to passport into those jurisdictions and act and provide services without needing to go through a new authorization process. So there's definitely a quid pro quo.
So
it's not all bad.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge plus. I mean, that has to be massive as the appeal for these crypto assets grows, which it seems to be doing exponentially with every month that goes by at the moment. Then that has to be a plus to be able to offer those services right across the EU. Once you tick the boxes, then that's certainly a plus. But I think one of the things that I've heard you say a lot, Danny, even outside of the crypto world, in terms of things that the businesses going down this route need to look out for, is the change. You talk about the change in their mindset once they become a regulated firm. It's not just you talk about not just the interests of shareholders. I think that, you articulate it better than me, but
like it's the key difference between a regulated financial services firm, which these firms will be quite shortly, versus somebody who is doing something else like selling you shoes. You come into my shoe shop and I manage to talk you into, you come in for a pair of wellies and I talk you into a pair of Manolo Blahniks for, I have no idea how much they cost. Thousands. Well, then fair play to me. So as long as those shoes are fit for purpose and they are actually shoes and they hold up until you get out of the shop, then that's my obligation satisfied. But if it was a financial service I was selling you, I can't just sell you the product that makes me the most amount of profit. I have to sell you the product that suits you best, and I act in your best interests. And so once you go into the regulated space, and they call it asymmetry of information, the fact that you as the provider of the service know more about the activity and have the opportunity to profit at your client's expense, you have to act in the best interests of your clients, of your investors, even if that acts goes against what might be in your own best interests or make the most profit for you. And so when it comes to firms not being, that haven't been regulated before, it's very important that they understand that this is now their primary goal or regulatory objective is to act in the best interest of their clients rather than necessarily themselves. And everything you do from now on, you can pretty much take, will require the blessing of your regulator. You can't wake up in the morning with a great idea and take it to market that afternoon, more or less. You got to expect there'll be some consent or interaction required with your regulator. So it's quite a different space. And when firms understand that and they can kind of get their head around it and they put in place the right people and the right procedures so that they don't miss the compliance bit because they're not used to it, then, they're in a good place. But it's when they just can't shift that mindset into this culture of being regulated and having somebody sit on your shoulder and having to ask permission, that's when you can find yourself in trouble where you you don't buy in properly to the new regulated life that you're going to lead.
It's quite a big cultural shift, isn't it? From a mindset perspective, it's very different, and particularly where when I think even to examples that we have live now in terms of matters, companies that have had large investment from venture capital or private equity then have a whole range of things they have to answer to to their investors, and a whole range of effectively in-house regulations contractually that they have to answer to, and then they have an even longer list of things with the regulator, with Central Bank of Ireland or whoever the regulator is as well. So it's a lot. It's certainly a lot to think about for them, but I mean, it's just unavoidable, isn't it? It's traditional financial services firms have been doing that, for decades, haven't they?
Yeah, I guess it's part of the growth cycle of a firm in this business that as you get bigger, you start to spend much more of your time on things like compliance and risk, and much less of your time on innovation and product development and doing things differently and better, just to satisfy whether it's your private equity investors into the business or a regulator or whoever.
Crypto needs to sit at the big boys table, basically. If it wants to have the kind of numbers against it that it does in terms of aggregate dollar value, it has to be treated like all the other assets at that level are treated as well.
Yeah, senior hurling time now, as famous Minister for Finance once said. It's senior hurling time. Yeah, time to put the big boy pants on.
Exactly.
Well, to wrap it up there, Andrew, a couple of things. Let's talk about, I guess, timing for when this is all going to come into place. And then also, I guess, the key messages for firms that are thinking about either are in this space or are thinking about entering into this space. So timing first.
Yeah, so as far as timing goes, so I think the message when this was first released in draft form around September, October time last year was realistically, you're looking at anything from 12, 18, 24 months, perhaps at most before it comes into play. I think 12 months from then, I mean, it's not going to happen this year. 18 months is probably more likely. But these things have a habit of being drawn out, particularly if it has to go through a few redrafts and is rehashed to address some of the points that we discussed.
Yeah, I read an opinion just the other day from one of the European committees, and they talked about mid-2022. So
yeah,
18 months to 2 years from the proposal.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably right there. And what was your second question? Sorry.
So in terms of the key takeaways for firms that are
of course
in this space and now facing into this or thinking of coming into this space.
Yeah, I guess that the message which we have rolled out a number of times now is look, we whilst we're not 100% sure of what this is going to look like, we have a good idea. And I guess the phrase, there's no harm in, to an extent, acting like a regulated firm even before you have to become regulated. It will be far less of a shock to the system if you have a functioning business which already has a lot of these processes that you're going to need in place. Then you have a much better chance of staying ahead of the field and ahead of your competitors when MiCA is rolled out and becomes law around the EU, rather than being late to the party and reactionary, going, oh dear, we now have a year's worth of work minimum just to be able to operate and run our business, which obviously would be extremely challenging for any business to take on. To not be able to offer the services it offers for 12 months, say, not particularly feasible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I'd say from my side, 2 takeaways. One, it's senior hurling time. This is big boy pants time. This is a regulated financial services industry, is an expensive industry to be in. If you are an Irish firm, you have to have a proper boots on the ground presence in the jurisdiction, with a number of senior people who know what they're doing and have experience, and all of the systems and everything that goes with that. So it's not a cheap business to get into. But if you are in that industry or you are thinking about getting into that industry, now is the time to act, because as the regulation is currently drafted, it gives an 18-month transition period from the time that the regulation is implemented. So if you get your skates on, you could get your business established, organize yourself as if you were regulated, and use this period of time to test what works well and what doesn't. And so that when you come to get authorized, which would be another 18 months after the legislation comes in, you should really be in a good place, because you've had the experience of running a firm to this standard, but giving yourself a bit of wiggle room to make mistakes if that's what happens, or to test what works best, but doing it in a safe way that you're not going to be subject to regulatory sanction because you're just coming into a regulatory regime.
Yeah, exactly.
Top tips.
Yep.
But it's yes, we've talked about it a while. It's coming sooner and sooner. So
get ready.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah,
listen, Andrew, always appreciate having you on the
Indeed. Thank you very much, Danny. Always a pleasure.
And frightening people off or setting them straight.
Yeah, of course. That's what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, thanks very much for your time. We'll catch you next time on the podcast.
Thank you, Danny. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you for listening today. We would like you to be involved in our next initiative. Visit fundsirelandminicon.com/get involved.